Thank you very much for being here. We will read my lecture for the fact that I don't think my English is that okay. I apologize for that. I started to be interested in the issue of representation in 1996 when I moved to South Africa for my PhD thesis. And basically it means the way we see things, we talk about them, describe, attach values, associate images, and give meaning to them, and the way these images serve to symbolize other things. I take two historical pieces because so far I believe they are the two first pieces written in the percussion literature, between 1982 and 1983. Das Guido by flutist Michael Coghone and composer, and Estudos, 4 short pieces for Reco Reco. The instruments used in these pieces are made out of different plants, which somehow brings to mind the idea of rootedness and belonging to a certain place, people, culture, nation. In this way, these instruments, they carry several meanings for those who use them within distinct musical traditions. As they move around and the music of others is consumed, issues of representation take specific forms. Michael told me that Das Guido is a piece for an unusual member of the percussion family, often misused and misunderstood. When he first started performing Latin dance bands, it was assumed that he would play some simple cha-cha-cha strokes on the Guido when he was not playing his flute. He was then left still holding that thing when the band picked up the tempo and started playing a guaguancó. And he learned very fast, quickly, that it was easy to play the cha-cha and very difficult to play the second one. So his experience makes evident the general. We cannot say that about all scrapers in the planet because the Dominican Republic is an exception, for instance. The general reality of this instrument, that is the absence of a specific musician to play it. Someone, read anyone, had to play that thing to give a Latin flavor to the music. So in this piece, the performer has to play 2 roles, that of a Guido player within the folk tradition of the instrument, and that of a scholar lecturing about the instrument. He says, the possibilities for the new Guido appear almost endless. At first, mere transcriptions will proliferate. He asked the guy to sing out of tune, like me, the Beethoven Guido. Then original Guido pieces will be composed. Eventually Guido quartets, sonatas for Guido and piano. Even Guido concertos will be written. The lecture is divided into 6 specific sections. Thank you. 1, we first point out how the term Guido itself has been used, misused, in order to represent and generalize different people, cultures, and nations. 2, we talk about the striking differences between those 2 first pieces written for musical scrapers or rasps. 3, we demonstrate the similarities between Coghone's piece and my own work with the scrapers for more than 30 years. 4, we take a specific idea of Coghone to be discussed. That is, his use of the Guido as an icon to challenge general representations in the West. 5, we extend his critiques by looking at how another piece for Reco Recos, 33 São Abóbora, has been used on the basis of the very same generalized ideas of the other. And 6, we try to emphasize how individuals have the power to defy general representations and follow a different path. The most striking example of overgeneralization and stereotyping is the way Euro-American tradition denominates all musical scrapers in the planet with the term guiro. Scores, musicians, percussion players, books, catalogs, methods. Through such a process, different people and cultures of at least 33 nations below the border of Mexico and the United States are seen as the same, playing the very same instrument and perhaps music and speaking the very same language, or even Latin, Spanish, their very same root. The term itself, as well as the scrapers made out of calabash, do not exist in Brazil, for instance. 200 million people do not know what guiro means. That would be a good example of a Cuban guiro. And these are some examples of Brazilian reco-recos. A metal one with springs, another one made out of springs in the central part of the country, Goiás, bamboo, plastic, bone. And you must know that reco-reco is an umbrella term, like ethnomusicology says. You have local names for some of these instruments. Baji, the Pernambuco, northeast area. The casaco, in the Espírito Santo, in the southeast. The Kanza, in the same state. The Cracaxá, in the state of Mato Grosso, the west part of the country. The Ganzal, in Minas Gerais, southeast. Okay. These pieces radically oppose one each other, and the main reason is quite simple. While I was trying to apply traditional material to those pieces I was writing, Kokhun was, in fact, criticizing such a practice. He criticizes, 1, the act of classicizing the instrument. 2, authority concerning it. 3, the overpowering tendency to apply traditional modes of thought to everything musical. Well, I was doing it at that time. Well, consider that it's 32 years ago. Through the creation of a new music bounded by elements of Western tradition, like adapting the notational system for the snare drum for the scrapers. Having a conventional approach to the instrument, writing a method for 4 years. I don't know why, but we did that. Having preference in sound production and a classical approach to it. Selecting different attacks, strokes, different ways of holding the stick to produce those sounds. Developing new techniques like this one for 2 hands. Using fixed and regular forms. Or even melodies. Well, this piece, they reflect individual experiences as musicians and our consequent different realities concerning scrapers. Example, their musical potential contrasted with the general idea of their non-musicality and musical limitation. This work, they seek to challenge and deconstruct notions of music in general, and scrapers in particular. And they are based on the contrast between two distinct realities. That is, the popular use of the instrument and its academic study. Its use in folk traditions and Western art music, the ways in which the instrument has been misused and misunderstood, its relation with the erotic, and the overpowering tendency of the West to standardize. We have already seen how the infamous Guido became Colquhoun's personal icon. Someone, read anyone, had to play that thing to give a Latin flavor to the music. So he uses the Guido for attacking Western art, Western music, and its inbred idiocy, contrasting it with popular tradition, as well as a central symbol to challenge established canons. Thus, each element presented in Das Guido assumes a political character. The piece is a direct attack on ethnocentrism, understood here as the application of the norms of one's own culture to that of others. That's why the performer must read the text in German, and how new styles of Guido appear, such as the Darmstadt Guido and the punk Guido. Some extant techniques presented by Colquhoun. And the windmill stroke. And this movement is going to become the movement of playing a guitar, so the punk Guido emerges. Let's continue discussing such issues of representation by looking at the ways another piece for Reco Reco has been misused by two American percussion ensembles, having in mind the main aspect criticized by Colquhoun. 1, the issue of representation itself. 2, the scholarly treatment given to the instrument. 3, his attack on ethnocentrism. And 4, the idea of a superior culture. We extend his critiques by looking at how the piece 33 San Abóbora has been used on the basis of this very same generalized idea of the other. We argue, well, I argue, that such practices are based on concepts of primitiveness, which in this new global era are masquerade under terms such as third world, undeveloped, Latin, Brazilian, etc. Several issues concerning the relation between Western and non-Western, central and marginal, already pointed out by Colquhoun on his seminal work, are presented in two critiques of the first performance of 33 San Abóbora in New York in 1987. Kyle again. The new music crisis, our moral dilemma over whether accessibility or autonomy is the greater good, does not seem to afflict the nations on the periphery of the European American mainstream. Whether these countries haven't caught up with us yet, or whether they are geographically immune to the crisis brought on by our fragmentation and self-consciousness, is something I have not figured out yet. Richard Schoen said, if minimalists like Steve Reich proved anything, it was that native musics have a formal integrity that equals anything that normally intellectual composers of Western art music have conceived. The State University of São Paulo Percussion Ensemble performance raised some interesting questions. At what point in its music does the indigenous tradition inform the Western academic one, and vice versa? How much is assimilated and how much is genuine? And ultimately, does it really matter? 33 San Abóbora posed the question, then rendered it superfluous. In 1997, 33 San Abóbora was presented as a premiere at the World Music Institute in the United States. So one question that arises is, how a piece premiered in 1997 can have two critiques dated 10 years before in two newspapers of the very same city? The piece was included in the program as a premiere, regardless the fact that Group Pulse's director was aware that it had premiered in New York 10 years previously. The piece was scheduled regardless of whether a written score existed or was available. And fundamental information that was made available and which could have been used to facilitate a better understanding and performance of the piece was remarkably neglected. Knowledge about scrapers and myself was intentionally constructed, falsely establishing me as an authority on guiro, an instrument that I have never used in any of my more than 100 pieces for percussion. It's interesting to note that the tendency to homogenize these small realities, to perpetuate sameness, is overpowering. In the case described, this becomes even more evident in the view of the fact that in 1995 I was invited to hold a masterclass on scrapers at the Manhattan School of Music, where the post-percussion ensemble was resident. It seems that although exposure to the diversity of scrapers, sounds, techniques, material, nomenclature, through my masterclass did represent a break with general perceptions and representations of these instruments, some of the participants continue to perpetuate this tendency to homogenize. And some of those participants create another group called Ethos. In the year 2000, they recorded this piece without my knowledge or consent. So I ask, would that happen with any legitimated, well-established composer, or even an average composer living in the United States or Europe or in Canada? My own answer is no. Could we say that the percussion environment is already dominated, or at least partially dominated, by the very same way of thinking and treating different others on the basis of how they are considered legitimate or not, important or not, remote or not, rooted or not? Well, my answer is yes. The few examples presented here demonstrated how any element from any remote reality can be included within the process of misrepresentation, as well as the transformation of the others, modern primitives, in objects. In his piece, Colquhoun was already calling our attention to such significant issues of representation, standardization, rootedness, centrality, marginality. I hope I have demonstrated how some discourses and facts involving some musical scrapers limit our understanding of them. A critical reading of scrapers or any given subject essentially challenges cultural boundaries and entrenched notions about them. Both composers use these instruments to highlight that the limitations and meanings that we believe to be real and natural are at least fallacious. Critical reflection on the diversity of scrapers is essential for the establishment of a new way of seeing them. We must avoid generalizing such ways, and one must see that scrapers are just a metaphor that serves as an example of how we could see any other object, any other percussion instrument or subject. Meaning in relationship to scrapers or any given subject can be personally constructed, affecting the way in which we perceive reality and truth. The musicologist Ayako Tatsumura claims that by experiencing music in a new way, one opens the door to a different world. A piece like Das Guido represents a clear break with the canon, questions it, and offers a new perspective on Western music and scrapers, and by extension, critical reflection by the individual on his, on her own experiences is essential to the revisiting of inherited cultural boundaries and representations. Thank you very much. Thank you.